On July 8, 1944, at 7:15 a.m., Private Guy Gabaldon stood alone at the base of Banzai Cliffs on Saipan. He was 18 years old, had already secured 2 successful prisoner captures, and had 0 backup. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers and civilians were hiding in the volcanic caves above him, contemplating suicide. The night before, a 15-hour Banzai Charge had resulted in the deaths of 4,000 Japanese soldiers. American commanders knew the survivors would either fight to the death or kill themselves before surrendering, as the Bushido code demanded suicide over capture. Gabaldon, only 5'4" and 130 pounds, carried an M1 carbine and 4 hand grenades. He spoke broken Japanese, which he had learned in East Los Angeles. Most Marines on Saipan had never seen a Japanese prisoner, as the Imperial Army fought with fanatical determination, having been told Americans would torture them and desecrate their bodies. By early July 1944, the 2nd Marine Division had lost 3,000 men on Saipan, and mass suicides, including civilians jumping from cliffs while holding their children, were common sights. Gabaldon was born in East Los Angeles on March 22, 1926. His family lived in the poor Boyle Heights neighborhood. At age 12, he moved in with the Nakano family, Japanese-American friends who taught him street Japanese, the rough, direct language of Little Tokyo. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Nakano family was sent to the Heart Mountain internment camp. Gabaldon joined the Marines, convincing recruiters he was fluent in Japanese. He was not fluent, but knew enough to get by. After boot camp and language school, he was assigned as a scout and observer with the 2nd Marines. The Marines landed on Saipan on June 15, 1944. 2 nights after the landing, Gabaldon left camp without permission. He found 3 Japanese soldiers near a cave, ordered them to drop their weapons in Japanese, shot one who raised his rifle, and brought the other 2 back as prisoners. His commanding officer, Captain John Schwab, threatened him with a court-martial. The next night, Gabaldon went out again, shot a guard, threw a grenade into a cave, and then shouted for surrender. 50 Japanese soldiers walked out with their hands raised. Captain Schwab then authorized Gabaldon to operate as a, quote, lone wolf. This was 6 days before the events at Banzai Cliffs. On July 8th, Gabaldon faced a problem no one believed he could solve. Hundreds of armed, desperate Japanese soldiers and civilians were preparing to die rather than surrender in the caves above. American commanders planned to use flamethrower tanks or artillery to collapse the caves, but Gabaldon had a different idea. He grabbed 2 Japanese prisoners he had captured the day before and told them they would go into the caves and tell the soldiers inside that surrender was the only option. At 7:30 a.m., Gabaldon sent the 2 prisoners up the cliff path. He told them to say that the Americans had warships offshore, bombers overhead, and tanks on the beach, and the fighting was over. Surrender meant food, water, medical treatment, and no torture or executions. Gabaldon waited at the base of the cliffs, carrying 45 rounds of ammunition. If the Japanese fought, he knew he would die in approximately 30 seconds. The Battle of Saipan had begun 23 days earlier. American planners needed the island, which was 1,300 miles from Tokyo, as a base for B-29 Super Fortress bombers. Saipan had 2 airfields and was defended by 32,000 Japanese troops and 20,000 civilians. The initial landing on June 15th cost the Americans 2,000 casualties and the Japanese 5,000. Japanese defenders built strong, interconnected cave systems and fortifications, which had to be cleared with flamethrowers and explosives. By late June, the Japanese were losing. Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, who had commanded the carrier strike force at Pearl Harbor, was trapped on the island. On July 6th, Japanese commanders ordered a final, massive Banzai Charge. The attack began at 4 a.m. on July 7th, with 3,000 soldiers charging American positions. The attack lasted 15 hours, and by sunset, 4,000 Japanese were dead, with survivors retreating to the caves. The mass suicide accomplished nothing except heavy American casualties, including 650 men lost by the 27th Infantry Division. Propaganda had convinced the Japanese that Americans would commit atrocities if they surrendered, leading to civilians jumping from cliffs while holding their children. Gabaldon waited for 30 minutes at the base of the cliffs. Then movement appeared. One Japanese soldier, then another, then 5 more appeared at a cave entrance, unarmed and walking slowly. More followed, 10, 20, 30, with some carrying wounded and others helping civilians. Gabaldon shouted in Japanese for them to form a line and sit down, threatening to shoot anyone who ran. The soldiers obeyed. The numbers kept growing, 50, 70, 100. Gabaldon, a single Marine, was now surrounded by over 100 Japanese soldiers and civilians. To buy time, he told the soldiers to separate from the civilians and the wounded from the healthy, creating confusion that lasted 15 minutes. During this time, the flow of Japanese from the caves continued, 200, 300, 400.
A Japanese officer in full uniform appeared at the largest cave entrance. Gabaldon spoke to him in Japanese, stating that resistance was finished, American forces controlled the island, and the Imperial Navy had been destroyed. He promised food, water, medical care, no torture, and no executions if they surrendered. The officer asked about the separation of soldiers and civilians, treatment for the wounded, and personal items. Gabaldon confirmed all the favorable conditions. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, and by then, the crowd on the beach had swelled to 500, 600 people. Gabaldon pointed to the American warships offshore and the fighters overhead, warning that the ships could flatten the cliffs and the caves would become tombs. The officer, looking at the 18-year-old private in a baseball cap and sunglasses, bowed slightly and agreed to the surrender terms. More soldiers emerged in groups of 10 and 20, some carrying stretchers. The count reached 700, then 800. Gabaldon was now alone with approximately 800 Japanese soldiers and civilians, with no radio or way to call for backup. Marine patrols might mistake the gathering for an enemy formation and open fire. Moving 800 people across contested terrain was impossible for one man. Gabaldon decided to organize the prisoners into tight columns, soldiers in front, civilians in back, wounded in the middle, and anyone who broke formation would be shot. While they formed up, Gabaldon climbed on a rock, took off his white undershirt, and tied it to a broken tree branch as a makeshift surrender flag. He gave it to a soldier in the front rank, telling him to wave it constantly and that if American Marines saw the flag, they would not shoot. The column began moving toward American lines. Gabaldon stayed at the front next to the flag bearer, keeping his carbine visible but pointed down. After 20 minutes of walking, 3 Marines on patrol appeared 300 yards ahead and took defensive positions. Gabaldon started waving his arms, shouting, "American-friendly prisoners, do not shoot!" But the Marines did not lower their weapons. One Marine raised his rifle, aiming at the 800 Japanese troops. Gabaldon shouted in English, "American prisoners, do not shoot!" pulled off his baseball cap and waved it. He then stopped walking, raised both hands, and shouted his name, rank, and unit, stating, "These are prisoners, do not shoot." The lead Marine finally lowered his rifle and approached. Gabaldon explained that 800 prisoners from Banzai Cliffs had surrendered that morning and needed transport. When asked how one private captured 800 Japanese, Gabaldon said he talked to them in Japanese, promised food and medical care, and pointed at the warships. He explained he learned Japanese in East Los Angeles. Within 30 minutes, trucks arrived with Marines and Captain John Schwab. Schwab asked Gabaldon if he had backup or a radio, to which Gabaldon replied no, adding that he had authorization to operate as a lone wolf 6 days ago. Schwab ordered the Marines to secure and transport the 800 prisoners to the holding area. Processing the prisoners took 4 hours, with soldiers searched and weapons confiscated. Intelligence officers interrogated the Japanese officer, who provided detailed information about the remaining 2,000 Japanese soldiers on Saipan, including their limited supplies and locations. This valuable intelligence allowed American commanders to plan final operations and probably saved American lives. By late afternoon, the 800 prisoners were secured without incident. It was the largest single-day prisoner capture by one individual in United States military history. Gabaldon returned to his unit. The next morning, he requested permission to go out again, which Schwab approved. Over the next 3 weeks, Gabaldon continued his lone wolf operations, capturing smaller groups and developing a reputation among Japanese troops. Some groups sent messengers asking to surrender only to him. By the end of July, Gabaldon had captured over 1,300 Japanese soldiers and civilians, more than any other individual in the Pacific Theater or any American war. Captain Schwab recommended Gabaldon for the Medal of Honor. General Holland Smith reviewed the recommendation, but downgraded it to a Silver Star with no explanation. On August 1st, Gabaldon and his unit moved to Tinian. On August 15th, while on patrol, Gabaldon approached a cave entrance, offered surrender, and 3 Japanese soldiers emerged with rifles. As he started talking, a Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun opened fire from the right flank. Gabaldon dove behind a fallen tree. His patrol of 5 Marines was pinned down. The Japanese gunner was disciplined, firing short bursts to conserve ammunition and suppress movement. Gabaldon realized they were in a tactical stalemate. Then, he saw 3 Japanese soldiers crawling through the undergrowth 20 meters away, attempting a classic infantry flank attack. They were planning to get within grenade range. When the lead soldier, who had pulled a Type 97 hand grenade, was about to throw, Gabaldon fired 3 rounds with his carbine. The soldier dropped, and the grenade fell and exploded, killing the other 2.
The machine gun immediately opened fire, and Gabaldon rolled behind a different tree. While the machine gun focused on the Marine patrol, Gabaldon crawled to the cave entrance. He shouted an offer of surrender, but receiving no response, he threw a grenade inside. 2 wounded soldiers emerged with their hands up and collapsed, and Gabaldon applied pressure bandages. The machine gun was still firing long bursts, signaling the crew was running low on ammunition and panicking. Gabaldon then felt an impact, a 7.7mm machine gun round through his left leg, just above the knee. He applied a tourniquet. Despite the blood trail and the wound, Gabaldon crawled to the nearest Marine position. He waved off help, insisting the machine gun had to be dealt with first. Since there was no radio for support, Gabaldon offered to negotiate with the machine gun crew from cover. 2 Marines carried him 50 meters closer to the position. Gabaldon shouted to the machine gun crew that they were surrounded and low on ammunition, offering surrender terms, but the machine gun answered with bursts of fire. While the machine gun focused on Gabaldon's position, 2 Marines flanked through heavy vegetation. They threw 2 grenades from 30 meters away. The machine gun stopped. The Marines assaulted the position, finding 3 Japanese soldiers, 1 dead and 2 wounded. The machine gun crew had been running low on ammunition. The Marines secured the prisoners and returned for Gabaldon. His leg wound was serious and he needed evacuation. Gabaldon was carried on a stretcher to American positions and evacuated to a hospital ship bound for Hawaii. The Navy doctor said he would recover full mobility, but his combat days were finished, and he would be medically discharged. While he was on the ship, Captain Schwab filed his recommendation for the Medal of Honor, which included witness statements, intelligence reports, and the total capture count of 1,300 soldiers and civilians. General Holland Smith reviewed the recommendation and downgraded it to the Silver Star. Historians later speculated that the decision may have been due to Gabaldon being Mexican-American, as minority soldiers rarely received top decorations in World War II. Or perhaps Smith did not believe one private could capture that many prisoners. Gabaldon arrived in Hawaii in early September 1944. In late September, a Navy officer informed him he was being awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism on Saipan and Tinian. He accepted the Silver Star, knowing it was significant, but also knowing that capturing 1,300 prisoners was unprecedented. He was medically discharged in November 1944 and returned to Los Angeles. He had a permanent limp and nightmares about his combat experiences. People did not believe his story of capturing 800 Japanese, thinking it sounded like propaganda. In February 1945, he received his Silver Star in a small, 15-minute ceremony with no press coverage. In 1957, a television show called This Is Your Life featured his story, with Marine Corps veterans confirming his captures. Suddenly, people believed him. Hollywood produced a film in 1959 titled Held to Eternity, but they cast Jeffrey Hunter, a tall Scottish American, as Gabaldon over Gabaldon's protest. The film, released in 1960, romanticized the story but brought attention to it. 1 month after the film's release, the Marine Corps upgraded Gabaldon's Silver Star to the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. The upgrade came 16 years after the original Medal of Honor recommendation. Many assumed the publicity from the film pressured the Marine Corps to act. The Navy Cross ceremony was held in San Diego. Despite the upgrade, the question of the Medal of Honor remained. His commanding officer had recommended it, witnesses confirmed the capture, and intelligence reports documented the value of the information gained. Gabaldon spent decades advocating for the upgrade, arguing that politics or prejudice had blocked the award. In 1998, fellow Marines launched a campaign to upgrade his Navy Cross. They gathered witness statements and documentation. However, the Medal of Honor recommendation had a strict timeline, requiring submission within 3 years of the action, and by 1998, it was 54 years too late. The Department of Defense maintained its position that the timeline had expired. While some military historians, like Lieutenant Robert Cheeks, expressed skepticism about the number of prisoners captured in one day, official records and the Navy Cross citation support Gabaldon's account. The documentation is verified. Gabaldon moved to Saipan and lived there for 20 years, where Japanese tourists sometimes recognized him and thanked him for treating their ancestors with respect. Guy Gabaldon died on August 31, 2006, at age 80. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Gabaldon's methods changed how the United States military approached prisoner capture operations. He proved that negotiation could succeed where violence would have failed, challenging the prevailing assumption that Japanese soldiers would never surrender. Military analysts later studied his techniques, and the analysis influenced psychological operations training and prisoner handling procedures. Today, a memorial plaque honoring Guy Gabaldon stands at the Ganapen American Memorial Park on Saipan. The United States Marine Corps teaches Gabaldon's methods at cultural awareness training courses, showing how one teenager with broken Japanese saved thousands of lives through courage and creativity.